Hi, Garrett Stuckey here with the Startup 360 podcast, where I interview founders on a 360 camera, so you can watch this on a VR headset and be a part of this interview. Do me a favor, please subscribe on YouTube, like and share as well. And today I have Adrian Laurenzi of TOTAGO, and well, let's talk about that. What is TOTAGO?
Yeah, so TOTAGO, the name comes from an acronym, Turn Off the App, Go Outside. And basically, our focus is, our mission and what we're all about is connecting people with nature. We're a software company, and basically our goal is to make it really easy for people to go outdoors and do things like hiking, bicycling, visiting parks, and in general just enjoying nature and connecting with the outdoors. One of the big focuses we have is on kind of transportation and basically making it so not having a car is not a limiting factor. So we have a trip planner that makes it easy to get outdoors using things like public transit, shuttles, and basically, putting all the information together so that you can kind of go to one place and go outdoors and enjoy yourself. And that's what we're all about.
Fantastic. So, where did that idea come from?
Yeah, so we've been around for a while, so things have definitely evolved a lot over basically about 5 years that the company has existed. But actually, it started as really just a sort of an idea of mine, like a hobby project where I have a background in software, so I basically ended up making this kind of early version of this, as a hobby project. So I'm someone who's gone outdoors my whole life. I tend to also try to avoid driving. I prefer to bicycle. I like to live in cities where I can bike everywhere. But a car is usually pretty helpful for accessing the outdoors. But I've always tried to not let that be a barrier. I grew up in Tucson, Arizona. Went to college in Seattle, Washington, and over there I didn't have a car, so I sort of started looking into like ways to do some hikes without a car, and found that while it's definitely possible, it's kind of like a very messy logistical process. The information is very scattered, so the idea pretty much just came about as sort of like something I would find useful. It's just like a way to kind of pull the information together and make this kind of easy trip planning experience for specifically like public transit hiking out of cities. One thing kind of led to another. Some people got interested in it, and some kind of friends of mine from college, basically we kind of ended up forming a company, long story short, and then things kind of grew from there.
Nice. So what brought you out to Detroit then? Because we're very car-centric.
Yeah, it's a great question. Interestingly enough, the one thing I'll point out about Detroit is, although it's the motor city, in fact, a huge proportion of the population in Detroit proper doesn't have access to a car, doesn't own a car. I think it's something like 40% of the city. And also a lot of young people I know don't have cars or prefer not to have one, even though that does make things difficult sometimes. Basically, after I lived in Seattle for about 9 years, had a great time there, went to college there, worked at a startup and also worked for myself. Over time I basically, being sort of a founder that is wanting to bootstrap primarily and not really have to be concerned with, outside funding, because I see that as something I prefer to, put off and not let that sort of be the dictating force of whether or not this company is going to do what I want it to do and be what I want it to be. Seattle's a tougher place to live, so one of the motivating factors for moving away was just the cost of living got really crazy, and ended up coming here partially because of that, but also my partner, she's from Michigan, and she kind of introduced me to Detroit, and I basically kind of fell in love with the city, and I saw it as a place I could live. I wouldn't have imagined myself here actually. Just kind of stumbled into it, and now I'm living here, so it's been awesome. I've been here about a little over 2 years.
Okay, yeah, and you're right. Detroit the cost of living here is a lot better in Michigan in general than Seattle, West Coast, things like that. So I can see how that's very helpful for a startup for you. Now, having been in Detroit, with the, I guess, like looking at this problem of, trying to get outdoors, go on hikes and things like that, what has that experience been like being here in this city compared to others? Seattle out west, right? You think of mountains and all that stuff. Has there been much difference?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, and I'm pretty, I guess another sort of thing about it, I really like to I like the challenge of like, what does nature mean here, and I like to kind of think about and kind of solve the problem, if you will, of like, where can I go do fun stuff outdoors from wherever I'm at, and so it's kind of been an interesting like whole new world of outdoor activities here, and everything kind of varies from place to place. Where I grew up in Tucson, kind of the outdoors there are very different than they were also in Seattle, and kind of culture around them is different, and here is a whole different world as well. So one of the things, I guess, each of those places are quite distinct, and I've been other parts of the world. So you go to Europe, for example, and in the U.S., the whole concept of like transit hiking or hiking without a car, especially when we started, was very niche, and kind of like people just sort of wrote it off. They're like, that's like a really weird thing. Like the U.S. everybody drives, and actually early on, most of our users or about half our users actually came from Vancouver, Canada, where it's a lot more mainstream to hike with the bus. The city and the parks departments kind of organize things such that transit is, high quality transit access exists to trails within the city region. Similarly, like in Europe, most people would use the train or public transit to access, things like even ski mountains or hikes. So, the U.S. is interesting, but over time it's become more of a focus of like land managers to try to find ways to kind of get more people, particularly in cities, out to these natural spaces, and to do it in a way where we're not necessarily having to build just gigantic parking lots, and we're not cutting off access just because people don't have a car. So it's definitely been an interesting thing to watch, like a stronger trend, a very clear trend where like that's something now land managers, even transportation entities, are starting to kind of focus on more. But going back to your question, here definitely the transit side of it is much, I would definitely say it's definitely harder, like particularly in Detroit. Like I live in very central kind of part of Detroit, like New Center kind of area for people that know it. In Detroit proper, there's definitely a lack of kind of natural spaces, although depending on how you look at it, there's actually a lot of open land, which are not like parks. They're sort of owned by a variety of entities, a lot of it by the city, but they're not really maintained as parks. So there's a lot of that kind of space, so it's kind of it feels like a lot of natural spaces, but they're not at all maintained as such, or advertised as such. So in order to get to kind of like traditional parks, you have to go kind of pretty far, outside the city. Generally, there is a few parks, like Belle Isle is definitely quite accessible, and that's a really nice area I love to go to. And then, but other places, you kind of have to get out to the Metro Parks system is kind of like what I consider to be the most like, it's like a natural park where you have like trails and kind of extensive, unmodified sort of, nature. And it's hard to get out there without a car in most cases. However, there is a lot of clever things you can still do. So, one of the things I take my bike, and you can access a lot with the bike. You can put your bike on the bus. I've done that a few times. You can also, there's a lot of water access, so I found that like, I've actually got an inflatable kayak, which is nice because I can even put that on the bike and like ride that.
Cool.
And there's a lot of cool things. So a lot of fun things you can do with water. So unlike in Seattle, for example, there's lots of hiking, very readily accessible from the city. But like if you want to get in the water, you can go in the Sound, but there's not like rivers that you can go in. But here the rivers are actually very accessible, so there's a lot of cool things you can do with the water. So that's been something I've explored a lot of and find to be interesting and different.
Awesome. So that's, because I would imagine every city is very different in terms of their nature space. So it's cool to hear Detroit is hey, there's a lot of water like within the city, and there's places to explore, and I like that.
Yeah, and one thing also, there's actually a lot of, there's definitely a lot of focus on, the Metro Park system is an amazing system, and it's kind of just outside the city.
Yep.
So it's almost, and some of it is accessible by transit, but that's definitely not the typical way people go there. They kind of, the people that manage those parks, I've actually talked with some of them, they are aware, they definitely would like to see transit being used, but that's certainly not, they don't really look at that as like a means that people use to access their parks typically, but they're starting to think about that a little bit.
Cool. So then part of your growth as a company, it seems like you are also educating park systems and transit authorities and really trying to, I guess, push this movement of combining those two ideas. Let's get people to these places. Is that something that you're seeing being like kind of maybe something that you're accomplishing is, hey, get a bus line out there? Is that?
Yeah, we've worked on that issue in a few contexts, and our sort of, even though we do have a lot of focus on transit, we also recognize like that's just one option, and really, we want to see just in general, want to just make it easier for people. Even if you do have a car, we still want to sort of provide people with like an easy path to the outdoors, because a lot of times people find, they just don't visit natural spaces because it's inconvenient, and maybe they think you have to drive, in the case of Michigan, like 3-4 hours to get somewhere, but in fact you can drive much less time, and even in some cases not have to drive. But yeah, in general, we're definitely like in a lot of conversations. I think particularly at this point on the West Coast, I would say on the East Coast, Midwest, there's less focus on access, but on the West Coast, we're definitely, I definitely feel like we've made an impact there, and actually like, in Seattle, we've kind of had, that's kind of where we initially founded, and where our first kind of product got off the ground, and at this point, when we first got off the ground, there wasn't a whole lot of things you might call initiatives around providing transit access trails. However, now it's been really cool to see the development of, there's actually a service that it's one of our partners, King County, and they actually provide a service called Trailhead Direct, and that service is integrated with our platform, and basically that's a transit service that you can use your normal Metro card, just like a normal bus, but it specifically takes people from different places around the city to trailheads, to like high traffic trailheads. So, and then in LA, we did a project there, and we had some we basically, part of that work was to help promote the idea of using LA Metro having trail access and access to the Angeles National Forest, and in particular be something that they consider when planning routes. And actually some of the routes have been, it's kind of this stuff takes time, and it happens over a long time period, but that is something they're definitely now considering. And there's some lines, especially where you have like an existing line that gets maybe close to the foothills of the mountains outside of LA, if you just kind of add a few more stops, now you actually make it from an hour walk to some trailheads. Now you can access a bunch of trails right off a bus stop, and the amount of distance the bus has to go extra is actually not that far. So and that's something also, our angle tends to be a little bit more on the side of like providing a nice tool for the public, and then we also are kind of involved in conversations, but a lot of like on the planning side, they're sort of looking at, okay, how can we provide better access through transit, and then once they actually make some decisions, we can then help make things easier to use, and in some cases identify new opportunities, and kind of having an interface that's like more people oriented can help make things feel more real. So I think that's another way we've had a lot of impact, is even for the planners, when they see an app that actually like shows here's what it looks like, and in both cases it can be positive, even when what it looks like is, actually it's really hard. Like the bus service maybe works pretty well on weekdays, but and this is kind of a common scenario because a lot of times buses are oriented around commuters, so they can kind of see, if I did this on Wednesday, it looks like a pretty good experience. It's an hour or maybe half-hour bus ride. But then if you go to like a Sunday or a Saturday when most people would want to go and spend the day hiking, it actually is not a very good experience on the bus, and the app can help variety of agencies kind of visualize that, and that can help spur kind of action or a change in thinking, or at least get people excited about changing things.
Absolutely, because I live near a bus line, and I take that downtown Ann Arbor a lot with my bike, and weekends and like evenings it's less frequent, and I have to like really be on. Am I going to be on time? So I see how that can impact it. Now so let's I guess so I want to ask you a few things. One is kind of your general business model, and then what I want to go into is so you're based in Detroit now, but you're doing a lot of stuff on the West Coast, and one thing that you see in startups here in the Midwest is, okay, how do we compete with these startups out west and things like that? And obviously you're very active out there, so I'll let you pick which one you want to tackle first. But so I guess, how are you making money, and what has it been like operating in the Midwest with a heavy West Coast influence or West Coast target?
Yeah, good question. I guess just to kind of outline the business model, which is not necessarily blatantly obvious, but even though our app is directed at just anyone really who wants to go outdoors, so it's quite a variety of people use it. Our business model is B2B, so we derive all of our revenue from our partners and clients, who range from organizations like the U.S. Forest Service, parks departments, some transit agencies, and regional planning agencies like the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, or King County, and then also nonprofits, and also outdoor-based businesses as well. So kind of a variety of organizations that kind of have some stake in outdoor recreation, and in many cases where it overlaps with transportation. And basically we kind of have a typical SaaS business where essentially we kind of operate through these kind of regional partnerships, and basically through each of these partnerships involve kind of putting information into our platform within that region. So it could be trail information, bike information, and basically the partner we're working with, generally is paying some kind of a basically a typical software as a service, so it's a subscription-based service, and then if there's kind of setup or configuration work that's necessary, that's an extra cost as well. But basically, we sort of have just kind of a standard software as a service rate for the clients we work with, and then sometimes our products are actually like white labeled or co-branded with our partners. So we kind of have our brand, but then we can be embedded into other websites, or other brands would kind of show up to kind of show that this hiking experience is related to Trailhead Direct, which is a service by King County, for example. Basically, that's kind of how our revenue comes. So we're sort of helping in various cases. In the case of like a land manager, our platform is useful for kind of things like visitor management, and also promoting what's they often call it alternative access to their spaces. So facilitating more people to access their trails and parkland through our sort of service, basically. And then we also help work with like kind of smaller outdoor-based businesses. So for them, it's kind of like a way, it's kind of listing a tour company or a rental, a small business that maybe rents kayaks or rents, gear, camping gear, for example. That's kind of a value add for the user, because they can, have relevant information that they might, businesses that would be helpful as they're, planning their outdoor trip. And then it's also a way for the business to kind of get more people to come through their doors and kind of get their name out there. So they also play into that same kind of model of paying basically some kind of monthly or annual fee to sort of be listed in the platform. And then they can also use the platform and use that to kind of augment their own website or social media. And basically one of the goals of this model is we don't want to rely on users for revenue, because that, to me, that's a barrier for people to use the service. So, so basically this model kind of enables us to keep our service completely free, and so it can have kind of the maximum impact and utility for just the general population. And then on top of that, we can also sort of align ourselves with land managers and any kind of organization that has like stake in the outdoor recreation, and that is helpful for like, for example, land managers, they have the official information, like where are people allowed to hike, what kinds of access do they want to promote. That's all also helpful, whereas some of the other apps that exist kind of rely on crowdsourced information from essentially random people that don't necessarily know what the official information is. So by having these kind of partnerships, any region that we exist in, our data is kind of coming from official sources and is kind of maintained by regional authorities or entities that kind of know that region and care about it.
Yeah, that's actually probably a really good benefit for the user as well. So when they get the information from your app, they know it's right.
Yeah, exactly.
So now we were kind of talking a little bit before the show. You've started pulling a salary for yourself, which means we've got some revenue coming in. What has that growth been like?
Yeah. So wait, I don't know if you had another question for me. I think
I did. Yeah. So I wanted to talk about operating. It sounds like your business is primarily West Coast in terms
at this
of
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, I did want to address that too. We're a remote. One thing also to put forward. Yeah, so I'm based in Detroit.
Okay.
We're part of a kind of a tech sort of incubation business accelerator kind of program here out of a place called Techtown, which is where we are right now.
Yep.
And basically, so I have an advisor here I work with, but the rest of the team is actually just scattered around the world. Actually, we have a woman in France. Right, she lives in France right now. One of our founders is from Mexico. Now he lives in the Netherlands, and then another employee is in Boston, and he's also kind of one of the co-founders, and then we also have someone still in Seattle. So one of the early founders is also from Seattle. So kind of scattered everywhere, and we kind of exist completely online. And most of our like client relationships don't really require being in person. I kind of bounce around, so I'll be making a trip out west. But that's by no means like essential. So we kind of operate through a remote model, which I think has been really powerful. And so we just happen to focus on the West Coast because that's where we started. But really we sort of don't see ourselves as like, we just happen to be West Coast based now, but we are absolutely like trying to, grow, in wherever our service is going to be valuable, which we think would be most places. But yeah, at this point, you kind of have to start and focus somewhere, and where I live and where I know the outdoors best, that was kind of the obvious place to do it. But as I've been living here, I've started to sort of make partnerships and connections here. So we're excited to like see what can happen in Michigan, particularly, and also East Coast. But as a startup, obviously you kind of have to leverage what you have, which is kind of like. And things are pretty disconnected when it comes to like the land manager networks. They don't talk. Although there is exceptions to that, but for the most part, the West Coast land managers and outdoor focused entities tend to kind of know each other over there within a state. Usually, it's kind of limited to a state. There's not as much kind of cross pollination happening all the way over here. So it just takes time to kind of build up that network and the sort of relationships.
All right, so you're really, I like that you're international then, and it's just most of you grew up on the west side or spent a lot of time out there, so that's just where your experience came from.
Yeah, exactly.
And now you're beginning to leverage your new locations appropriately. So then what, with working remotely, obviously you have, we're talking especially from Netherlands and France to Seattle, it's 9 or 10 hours.
It's actually, to Seattle, yeah, it's 9 hours, yeah.
How is that, managing that then, or?
Yeah, it's pretty much fine because we operate our like sort of default mode of communication is like Slack actually.
Okay.
I definitely have meetings, especially me, kind of one-on-ones with everybody. But asynchronous communication tends to just be not the best. It's especially for a company like ours where most people are not full time.
Yeah.
So kind of having that ability to like check in when they have time wherever they happen to be is a much more efficient than always having to like schedule meetings or be working at the same time. That's just and so yeah, we use basically like asynchronous communication through like Slack. We do a lot of probably extra documentation of things to kind of mitigate that, and that also has a lot of benefits too. Like client projects tend to go better if you do more around documentation. So yeah, being remote is actually sort of relying on having a really solid asynchronous communication. Makes that not really much of an issue.
Nice.
And I do a lot of the with sales type work and partnership stuff rather than kind of technical implementation. That obviously the time zone is important, but again, it's kind of like we kind of keep in touch, but people just do the work when they have time, and they kind of obviously being in in France, it's a big time difference, but she can basically make calls at the normal business hours, but for her it's obviously a different time, but that's okay.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So if you could have everybody here in Detroit or everybody in Seattle, would you actually switch, or do you actually, because you kind of talked about the documentation being a strength of working remote, would you change it?
Yeah, no, we're like, from the beginning we like made a pretty firm, like deliberate decision. Even though we all happen to be in Seattle when we founded, we actually always kind of consider ourselves like a remote first company. So yeah, we're going to continue to be remote first. Because I consider that a big strength in terms of like talent acquisition, obviously that side of things, but also just lifestyle. Like, I mean, I like the fact that I can work from wherever. I like to move around. I travel. I've lived in other countries, and I like to kind of preserve the ability to do that. So I want to have a company that kind of enables people to do that, because I think that not only spurs creativity, it's like the ability to like not be locked into this kind of 9 to 5, so to speak.
Yeah.
Where there's obviously a clear expectation of getting work done, but it's up to you about how you want to manage your life, and we want to give people, including myself, the flexibility to sort of do exciting things like travel in other countries or do lots of outdoor activities and not have work be something that inhibits that. And I think that's good for it's a good lifestyle, and it also is like good for creativity. Like for me and Rob is one of my co-founders, and we and him, we would have a lot of like hike meetings where we would like just be outdoors without any computers or anything, and that's where a lot of like great ideas came from. So I think giving that flexibility is really powerful, but at the same time, I do think in-person interaction is important, and like having so definitely want to make a point to bring people together as often as we can, really, and that's reasonable, and have fun with each other in person.
Yeah.
And then another thing I guess I would say is I definitely do see value in having people, like I do want to hire someone in Detroit. So the next full-time kind of hire, I definitely want it to be someone who's like ideally based in Detroit. But again, that's not going to be a hard requirement, but it's going to be a preferred, because I think there's a variety of reasons I think that's good, but even so, they're still going to have flexibility to like, if they want to work remote for 2 months or whatever, then that's fine, do it. Yeah. Or if they happen to sadly, if they ever left, that wouldn't be an issue necessarily. They had to move to, or they moved to the city over, things like that. So, but I do see value. It'd be nice to have, someone, that I could hang out with in person more. That's definitely, because I see benefits in that, I definitely would have a preference for someone being here if possible.
Gotcha. So.
But yeah, kind of see the pros and cons to each. But in some ways, I think it's an ideal mix to have people spread out, but then also have, have some local presence as well.
Okay.
And some at least, a couple people in the same location, I'd see that as valuable as well. Maybe that's the optimal mix, I don't know,
Yeah.
we'll see.
A bunch of small offices scattered
Yeah.
around the globe
Yeah.
and remotes. Now, kind of going back to my earlier question then is, so you started pulling a salary, and from your business model, obviously you have land managers and organizations, paying you. So what is your kind of like revenue growth been like, and what are your prospects looking forward? And yeah, obviously it's really exciting to not have to do other work to pay your bills. So
so that's a good question. So basically at this point, growth has been really awesome this year. This has been something I've personally worked on, and the early, the kind of early founders, this has been something we've worked on in some capacity for over about over 5 years now. I sort of, one of the my sort of method of bootstrapping, one of the things that enabled me to do this without having to seek funding, for it initially, was being able to sort of freelance and then still maintain like a consistent focus on the business. And so the kind of the growth over the last 7 months has kind of enabled me to completely focus on this full time, and then even hire a few extra people on it part time. So the growth's been great in that regard. And then kind of at this point, we're sort of shifting, in some sense, we've sort of created a model that sort of simplifies how we work with partners and clients, and also allows us to kind of work with different kind of entities that are kind of have different levels of need, I guess you could say, and in terms of how much sort of custom attention they would need. So essentially, at this point, we're sort of shifting to focusing on trying to sort of grow with a lot more smaller entities, and so that's kind of like the next sort of chapter of growth, is we're hoping, we're kind of targeting a lot of smaller entities where it's kind of a more self-service, so kind of being onboarded into the platform and sort of getting value from the platform as like a small gear rental shop or outdoor-based business. That's something that they can kind of do with minimal time and effort on behalf of like TOTAGO staff. And so it's kind of like, and also the cost is going to be very affordable for like a small business, and it's kind of like more self-service to get integrated into the platform and kind of use the platform to promote their business, to provide more information around the outdoors in their region, and basically that's kind of where we're kind of focusing a lot of our kind of sales kind of efforts, and so that's kind of over the next 6 months we're aiming to have like a lot of growth be there, and that's like a really nice kind of growth where most of the revenue is going to be requiring a lot, like allowing us to kind of put that revenue into like core product development instead of using our time to kind of do custom things that are more one-off, basically.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of like the next phase of growth we're orienting around, and over time, getting more kind of self-service so that we can kind of focus more and more effort on the core product and improving that, and then bringing the kind of improvements to the product to all of our partners and clients.
Okay. So then you're kind of, what I'm hearing then is we have, on one hand, kind of how you've started is kind of the customized, even white label, co-branded products with larger organizations, which are probably nice shots in the arm in terms of revenue, and now we're trying to make it accessible to basically everybody, where they can just come on and do it and keep going. And then for those that still need that customization, that's available, but obviously
and we kind of consider certain partners we're very deliberate about with like who we sort of offer kind of these more customized services to, and those we kind of think of them as like being design partners, where they have a very interesting alignment with our overall product, and so their input and the things that they may need that are custom are really well aligned with our general product kind of roadmap and vision, and therefore they're going to help us improve the product in a way that like is applicable to lots of different entities that we work with, and aligns with the kinds of things that our users are telling us that they would, want to see, basically.
I like that, because that's getting paid to make a product that applies widely that's obviously a very smart move. It's because it takes no investment on your part, right? You're getting paid, so that's really great. Now I'd like to talk about your Accelerator a little bit.
Sure.
So that's TechTown is. I guess, is that what it is?
I know
we're in the TechTown building, so
yeah,
I want to be careful here. So
so I guess I like call it like what I like to call it is like incubator light kind of. It's kind of, I'm trying to think of the official term they use here, but basically what it essentially is access to, they're sort of like a hub of business resources you could think of, and other kind of businesses that are kind of based in the Detroit area or have strong ties here. And basically through the program, we basically get access to kind of a dedicated mentor they call entrepreneurs in residence, and they're basically like people with really great really extensive experience in startups and business, and we meet with our advisor whose his name is Jeff Ponders. He's been amazing, and before that we worked with a previous advisor named Francis Gloria, and he's also amazing, and they've basically kind of been our primary resource, if you will. They're very like invested in the, they know what we, they really have deep knowledge of the business, and also a lot of experience where they can kind of help us in terms of what we need to kind of get to the next phase of growth. And then on top of that, they connect us with all kinds of resources that are available either from the state or just other people that have like, there's a wealth of knowledge and skills that they kind of can connect us with. And so we've had a huge amount of, we've been helped tremendously by this network and our advisor. And then also there's kind of like reviews every 6 months where, we present and sort of, get feedback and things. So it's been really valuable.
Awesome.
And it's very flexible too, which is nice. It's not tradition, like what I didn't feel like a traditional, or I don't know if you want to call it traditional, but what you typically refer to as a business incubator programs. They're very, like, in my view, very locked into this kind of venture type model where it's kind of about these different stages of growth, and I saw that as not necessarily the most ideal path for us, and so I didn't see, and also like the way they operate, to me it wasn't an ideal fit. Most of those programs I didn't see as a good fit. This has been like an amazing fit, and it's a lot more flexible for the kind of business we're running.
Cool. And to be a part of that program, are you paying for it? Are you giving up equity?
Yeah, so it's kind of like, there's no equity given up. It's kind of like, sort of like, it's essentially like a business, it's like a loan. So we kind of owe a certain amount of money that we pay back in the form of like a percentage of our revenue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's a really cool model. So and then once we're paid off for a given like period of engagement, then that's it. So yeah, it kind of just operates as like almost like a business loan.
I like that,
and you have to apply to get in.
Okay, and so they want to make sure that you are somebody that can produce revenue, because they want to get paid obviously for their work, but also that means they're invested, right? That's and I really like that. And you said you've had massive success and growth because of it. So, do you think that without it, TOTAGO would even still be around, or what's?
Yeah, I would say. I mean, they've been. It's hard to say, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely, especially being like having to do a lot myself to kind of keep the business going, and having other people involved, obviously. But it's hard when you don't have like a bunch of capital to work with, off the bat. Like whether you're self-funding it and have a lot of money to work with, which I didn't. Or having some kind of seed money, we didn't have. We were just kind of bootstrapping. So, a big limiting factor is just it's hard for people, to be able to focus on it when you don't have a lot of money hanging around to pay people salaries, right?
Yeah.
But having the sort of support is like huge, just for like having resource to take advantage of as I'm sort of like just getting things off the ground and growing it. So yeah, I would say it's had it not been for that, I think it would be mentally harder too, just because there isn't as much like support for just this struggle of being a bootstrap company entrepreneur. So yeah, I think it's hard. Yeah, who knows? I mean, I think what I would say is without the advising, because for me this is what I'm passionate about. I'd be doing it in some form or another, but I think I don't think I would have gotten to the point of being able to like focus on this full time nearly as quickly without this kind of support and also just helping me look at the right things to make it into a business that's sustainable and can grow in a way that I can support myself and the small team. That is where they're tremendously valuable, and without the support from TechTown, I don't think it would have been. I would probably still be in a position where I was trying to juggle a few other things to like keep this going, or
Gotcha.
So
Cool. So we're getting kind of lower here on time. So before we hit the rapid fire questions, I'd like to ask, is there something that we haven't touched on that you want to make sure we get out before we get into rapid fire and how we get a hold of you and all that?
Can't think of anything right now.
All right. Well, cool. Well, in that case, let's do the rapid fire. So, my first question is, what is your best habit?
I guess I think there's a lot of ways I could think about that, but maybe interpreting the term best most generally, I like to say like bicycling, like, because to me that's just been a habit I developed from a very young age, just as my main mode of getting around. And to me it's just like I love biking. It's like it's fun, it's good exercise, it's doesn't pollute the air or the climate, doesn't alter the climate in negative ways. So yeah, to me that's a great habit. It's just the habit I have of just like biking being my default mode of transportation. So yeah, it's good for my mental health. Just being out on the bike. And I've just been, that's kind of like always how I've gotten around since basically middle school. So it's a pretty strong habit of mine, and awesome. I don't know. To me, I don't like any other form of transportation. I kind of like. I'm always like just thinking of a bike, how nice it'd be to just be on my bike.
Cool. No, I enjoy biking as well, so that's a great habit. So conversely though, what are you bad at and how are you solving it?
Yeah, so sometimes I think something I'm sort of bad at, but I guess is sometimes like balance. I don't know, sort of let's see. Staying focused sometimes I think is something I'm kind of bad at, or I tend to sort of, which is something I've definitely been working on, but I guess I've been maybe bad at not overcommitting to things, and so being like realistic about what my time is actually, what time I actually do have, and not just getting myself, which I assume a lot of people have probably this struggle, but I'm not the best at being realistic about my time. So I kind of, especially in the past, one thing I've kind of fought a lot against is just stretching myself too thin, and so there's just so many things I think that are like interesting to work on, and a lot of times I'm just like much more optimistic about like how much time I actually have at the end of the day. So I think that's something I definitely generally can be kind of pretty bad at. There's definitely other things too. That's one thing that comes to mind, is just kind of being realistic about my time, and like not overcommitting and then figuring out later that I feel stretched too thin.
Gotcha.
But yeah.
All right. So my next question is, what is your advice to a high school graduate, college graduate, and a 50-year-old?
Yeah. All right. So college graduate, I guess the first one, right? Or no, high school.
High school, college, and then 50-year-old.
Okay, cool. Maybe I'll just bundle the two.
Yeah, do it.
Because I would say similar advice would be like because I think a lot of times there's like a pressure in our sort of modern society, especially on kind of people in the high school, college age, to like, basically just be really focused on the next career step, or going from high school into college, and then being really focused on making sure you're setting yourself up really well for the job after college. Or my advice would just be like, take some notes from like Europeans maybe, or I don't know. To me, they're good. A lot of European countries have a different culture where there's like, for example, there's I can't remember what the term is called now, but basically it's kind of like totally normal to like take a gap year, basically, either between high school and college, or after that, or some point during college. I don't know if I think the gap is totally between high school and college, but people do it at different times. But it's just kind of like very common to just take a year off and just not put any pressure on yourself, and just like enjoy yourself, travel, go see the world, and not worry about your next career move. So I guess my advice would just be like, make sure to take some time to like step out of the sort of rat race, for lack of a better term, and like take the time you have at that age to do something like that. Because I did that myself, and I feel like it was like the best, some of the best experiences of my life. But not only there's benefits even in the career path I've chosen from taking time off like that. I think it's just an extremely valuable experience for all kinds of different reasons. And my advice would just be, don't let all these pressures that exist around us prevent you from doing things like that.
Cool, I like that. How about the 50-year-old?
50-year-old, yeah. I mean, I don't know what advice I could give. I guess I'd give this advice to almost, I don't know, this is just some advice, especially to maybe older people, I think, would be to, and even to any, to a lot of people, but particularly I think maybe older people might, I don't know, maybe it's more significant for them, I don't know. But it would be, I guess stepping back to why I think this is good advice, I feel like a lot of value in sort of stepping outside my comfort zone and like my social circles, or my comfort zone in terms of like the type of people I'm around. I think really stepping out of that into like worlds where people think differently, are different in a variety of ways, have come from a very different background, all of these kind of different things, trying to like actively, I think it's just like my advice would be just like try to break down those barriers that kind of divide people into like hanging out and spending time with people that are sort of more, have come from a similar background and think similarly. And to me, I think that's like, I've gotten so much out of, even living in a place like Detroit, that I feel like being here versus like, in a lot of ways compared to Seattle is very, I felt like I didn't really get outside of a world where I felt uncomfortable, in the sense that people were coming from different backgrounds. Over there it was much harder to do that, whereas in Detroit I feel like there's a lot more opportunities where I've kind of been forced out of my comfort zone, or experienced a whole variety of people that come from a lot of different backgrounds, and life experience, and I feel like that's been very valuable. So I guess my advice is just like